Hello everyone and welcome to round 6 of the 2019 Tata Steel Chess Tournament. Like we said, there was a rest day and everyone's always anxious how the games are going to turn out after the rest day. Will it be a series of dull draws or will there be fireworks on the board? And there's still some games being played while I'm recording this, but there have been quite a few decisive games. Let's just put it like that. And I will show definitely a few more games from this round, so we're gonna save the standings for a few of those games. So here we have Magnus Carlsen, World Chess Champion, versus Shakhriyar Mamedyarov, who needs no introduction, but I think he's currently third on the world's rating list, right behind Fabiano Caruana, but he has dropped on the live rating list. I think Dinglira now overtook his place as number 3 in the world, but only in live ratings. We'll have to wait until February and of course until the end of this tournament to see how it goes. But yeah, okay, without further ado, Carlsen managed to break the curse and win his previous game, so let's see how he faces off against Mamedyarov. Knight to f3, d5, we have d4, knight to f6, c4, and the d captures on c4. So far the queen's pawn opening, but after e3 we transpose into the queen's gambit accepted. Okay, we have e6. This is a very theoretical opening, so a lot of the moves that are being played here are all standard theory that has been used many times before. Bishop captures on c4, developing a piece with tempo, grabbing a pawn. c5, attacking the center. If you want, you always want to play c5, especially when there's something to attack with it. We have castles, a6, and now b3. But White is not worried about b5, as this will be overextending on the queen side a bit, not really gaining all that much, as b3 has been played, so c4 will never be an idea for black. b6, preparing to fianchetto the light square bishop, and now d captures on c5. Carlsen, as usual, is down with exchanging queens. Queen captures, Mamedyarov goes for this, rook captures, and bishop captures on c5, again developing the bishop while capturing a pawn. Bishop to b2, Carlsen develops the fianchettos the dark square bishop, and knight b to d7. Knight b to d2, we have bishop to b7, all standard developing moves, just trying to develop your pieces as naturally as possible. Bishop back to e2, making room for the knight on c4, and now castles by Mamedyarov. Knight to c4 and rook f to d8. Carlsen still wants to play rook ac1, Mamedyarov wants to play rook ac8, and here knight to e1. He wants to bring this knight over to d3 to attack the bishop on c5. And here, this position is known in the database, b5. There is one game that b5 has been used, but here, after bishop to d5, the move Mamedyarov used, we have a completely new game on our hands. And okay, rook a to c1, Carlsen brings the last undeveloped piece into the game. Rook a to c8, Mamedyarov does the same, and now knight to d3, attacks the bishop on c5. Of course, Mamedyarov wants to keep his bishop pair, so he retreats with the bishop to e7, and now knight c to e5. A very active square for the knight, also offers a trade of rooks on the c file, but a trade of rooks isn't really either of them is looking for. Everyone wants the other player to grab first, but of course neither will do it. Bishop back to b7, and now comes knight back to c4. We have bishop back to d5. With this move, perhaps Mamedyarov is just testing Carlsen. Will he be interested in a draw by repeating moves, but hardly with the white pieces. So Carlsen goes back with the knight. Knight to d2 and forces Mamedyarov to play on. Bishop back to b7, and Mamedyarov repeats, and now king to f1. Improving the position of the king, bishop to f3 is an idea, and the king will also be able to join in all the fun. h6 and bishop to f3, now offering a trade of light square bishops, but knight to d5. Mamedyarov declines it. We have knight back to c4, pressuring the b6 pawn, and now b5, kicking the knight back. Knight to a5, attacking the bishop on b7, and now bishop to a8, and now a3. And okay, Carlsen did make some progress here. He did push this bishop all the way to a8, and there is at least something going on. But on the other hand, with his pawn on b3 and black's control of the c4 square, that knight is pretty stranded on a5. And okay, g5. Mamedyarov says, okay, now we are definitely playing this game, and he stops repeating moves, decides to play on the king side. H3, F5 now, grabbing a lot of space here on the king side, and B4 by Carlsen. Preparing knight B3, retreating with the knight. You do have to activate it, you don't want your knight to be stranded on the edge of the board. As you all know, the knight on the rim is grim, or some say dim. Preparing knight b3 and creating a very nice outpost for the knight on c5, as from b3 both of the knights will be controlling c5. King to f7, and now comes knight to b3 as planned. Bishop to f6, offering a trade of dark square bishops, and Carlsen accepts it. Bishop captures, and now you have to capture with the king. You can't capture with the bishop, as then you will, for example, if bishop captures here, rook captures, and now this rook can infiltrate via the c file. So we don't want to allow white any such small advantages. So king captures on f6, and now knight b to c5, finally grabbing this outpost and also pressuring the a6 pawn, because you cannot defend with bishop to b7 as the knight is controlling the b7 square. On the other hand, you don't want to capture the knight. If you capture, then knight captures. Again, this pawn is under attack, and now you can't defend it with the rook because you're getting in the line of this bishop, and if you play something like knight here, then white can easily win the game with knight d7 check. It's too overwhelming. King g6, now rook captures on c7. Rook captures, and now knight e5 check. We'll pick up the rook here. Will now be completely winning. Rook captures. If you capture the knight, then you lose the bishop, and if first bishop captures, then the knight can recapture, and still you are up a full piece. So after knight b c5, you have knight 5 to b6. Mamedyarov creates a little trick, because here if Carlsen goes for the pawn with knight captures on a6, then after bishop captures on f3, pawn captures, and knight c4, he will have a very nice control of the c file. The a3 pawn is a bit weak, and even though he's down a pawn for the moment, Carlsen's pawn structure is a bit messed up, he definitely has compensation. So here after knight 5 b6, Carlsen first retreats with a bishop to e2, avoids this exchange and messing up of his own pawn structure, and gains further control of the c4 square to prepare for the arrival of this knight. We have knight to c4, and now comes a4. Now the a3 pawn is no longer a target, and also black cannot capture because the pawn has to keep an eye on the knight on c4. So we have knight d to b6, preparing now to capture, as the knight is now controlling, guarding the knight on c4, but now a5. Forcing the knight back, we have knight to d5, and now the a6 pawn is finally weak, and Carlsen grabs it. Knight captures on a6. But Mamedyarov had everything planned out. He decides to go for this very nice, well, it's not a sacrifice, it's two pieces for a rook and a pawn, knight captures on e3. F captures, knight captures with check, king has to move, king g1, and now knight captures on d1. So grabbing the rook captures on d1, Carlsen doesn't want to allow further trades, and now rook to c2. So as you can see, Mamedyarov is now up a pawn, it's 5 to 4, and Carlsen has 2 knights for Mamedyarov's rook. For the moment, white will always be better because 2 pieces are better than a rook, and regardless of Carlsen being a pawn down, he does have a passed a pawn, which of course is very strong as it's a protected pass pawn. Okay, bishop to f3, Carlsen wants to exchange light square bishops now. Bishop to e4, going after the knight here. Now you cannot capture the bishop, as after pawn captures, the knight will be hanging, and the rook on d1 is undefended. So knight comes to c5, trying to include the other knight into the game, and now you can see that already this pawn is very dangerous. This passed pawn is, well, we could say very fast. Bishop captures on d3, rook captures on d3, rook captures on d3, and now knight captures on d3. We have e5, preparing e4 to win a piece here. You have to move the knight or the bishop. First you want to move the bishop. Carlsen plays bishop to b7 as you want to keep control of the a8 square. You don't want to allow this bishop to stay here, and then if e4 is played, then the bishop is no longer controlling a8, which is the queening square. So first bishop to b7, now comes e4, and knight to c5. So already you can see that if this pawn was on a7, it would be winning. Carlsen would just have to queen, and the queening square is protected. So king to e5 by Mamedyarov, now comes a6, and rook to a2. You cannot allow white to push a7. And now there are a couple of ways you can approach this position. You can either try knight b3 and the block off the rook with knight a5, or the idea that Carlsen goes for, which is bishop to c6. You want to win the b5 pawn as well, and then just push the b pawn to victory. And here is the critical moment of the game where Mamedyarov, he decided that this position was a draw, and in that regard he's correct, but it's not a draw regardless of what you play. Here Mamedyarov played h5, which is the losing move. There was the only way to go for not losing this game is either king d4 or e3. One such line is e3, bringing your pawn even closer to queening, and now after bishop captures on b5, king d4. And here it's very hard for white to make a move. For example, if bishop to d3, it's f4 is coming, you don't want to lose this pawn, but now white can't really move anything. You can't move this pawn as it's not protected. You can't move the b5 pawn because the b pawn protects the knight on c5. You can't move the knight because it protects the bishop on d3. So black would be able to hold in this position, but here it's after h5, the move Mamedyarov played, it's simply too late for black. Carlsen grabs the pawn, and now the same idea no longer applies. If you try e3 now, you are one move too late. Now comes bishop c4, Carlsen would attack the rook. After rook a1 check, king would move, and now it doesn't matter. If, for example, king d4, you simply lose to knight b3 check because you lose the rook. And if you try to bring a rook to a3, let's say, then it's really then it's just beautiful how white wins. Knight b3, you're preparing knight a5 to block off the rook. Now comes e2, you force white to capture, so white has to give up the knight. Bishop captures, rook captures here, and now b5. The bishop is controlling the b5 pawn. King to d6, you want to use your king to stop the pawns, but now comes a7. Rook a3, you prevent the pawn from queening, and now comes b6. And here's the real problem. Now you cannot approach the pawns with the king. You cannot go here because the pawn is controlling c7, and you cannot go here because if you go here, then you see how white wins. A8 queen. Rook has to capture, and then bishop to f3 check picks up the rook. King captures, bishop captures, and now with 2 pawns and a bishop, this is a winning endgame for white. So after bishop captures on b5, Mamedyarov here saw that he messed up and he had to devise a different plan. He played the g4. And okay, h captures, we have h captures, and now comes bishop to c4 by Magnus, attacking the rook. Preparing, there's the idea of the little trick that we mentioned, if rook a1 check, which is played. King h2, now of course the king cannot approach because of bishop knight b3 winning the rook with a fork, so f4 here. We have b5 by Carlsen, and now comes f3. b6 by Carlsen, and here king to f4. And here Carlsen has a lot of ways to continue this game. The problem is if you play something like b7, then this is met with g3 check, king h3, and rook h1 will be checkmate. So this is one way for Carlsen to blunder the game. But of course he did not become world champion for blundering games in such a fashion. It did happen a few times in his career, of course, but not in this particular game. Here Carlsen played knight captures on e4, simply forcing the king to move away from the pawn. The knight now controls g3, so g3 check is impossible. And it was in this position that Shakhriyar Mamedyarov resigned the game. Why did he resign? Well, if you just ignore the knight and try to, get your pawn active, it doesn't really work. The knight still controls f2. You don't gain anything by capturing here. b7, b8 is coming. It's completely winning for white. On the other hand, if you capture the knight, then there's no real danger of g3, and white will simply push b7, and next move will win the game. If you play rook b1, then a7 is coming, still winning. There is one way Carlsen could blunder this. For example, if king e3, now b8 queen, and now king f2. If for some reason Carlsen didn't start with checks and decided that he wants another queen for some sort of weird reason, then black has a winning idea. So feel free to pause the video. It's actually a nice idea. It could happen in your own games if your opponent is careless or greedy or whatnot, or he likes queens. I don't know. But yeah, feel free to pause the video here and try to find its checkmate for black. I'll give you a couple of seconds. For those of you who were able to do it, congratulations, you are a very tricky player. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, rook to h1. Forcing the king to capture. After the king captures, now f captures and g2 comes with check. King has to move, and now pawn to g1 queen is checkmate because, of course, the pawn is guarding the h3 square. So there were ways for Carlsen to blunder, but Mamedyarov doesn't test him. He simply, after this knight captures on e4, he decided to resign the game. So yeah, a very nice victory for Carlsen after those 20 draws in a row. Now 2 wins in a row, so we could, you know, perhaps we'll see now a huge winning streak. But yeah, like we said, I will show some other games from round 6 of the 2019 Tata Steel Chess Tournament, and then we're going to talk a bit more about the standings. But as some games are still being played, I think it will be a four-player draw. Carlsen, Nepomniachtchi, and Anish Giri are currently tied for first, and I believe Dinglerian will join them, as his game will most likely end in a draw. But we'll definitely talk about that some more. I would like to thank Anthony Savoy, Rick Seeger, Douglas Perry, John Merlino, and Tyler Garat for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon. Don't worry, we are definitely continuing the Capablanca saga, but you know, that saga is not going anywhere. This is happening right now, so we do have to cover the current events as well. So thank you all, and I will see you soon.